Hi everyone, this video is about the philosophy and basic assumptions of narrative therapy. So the philosophy of narrative therapy is that therapy should be a collaborative effort that is focused on listening respectfully to the client's stories in a way that is non-blaming and non-pathologizing. This approach also views people as separate from their problems. The originators of narrative therapy felt that it was important to see people not as broken or as problems, or for them to feel powerless, rather to view people and their problems as something that people have. So a problem is something that a person has. It's not something that identifies who they are. Therefore, when people are able to externalize their problems, they can examine the problem more objectively and assess how the problem might be helping them, protecting them, or hurting them. With this new perspective, people feel more empowered to make changes in their thought patterns and behaviors and rewrite their life story for the future. And this future that is rewritten should be more reflective of who they are, what they're capable of, and what their purpose is, separate from their problems. So with the focus being on separating the person from the problem, this involves searching for times when clients were strong or resourceful rather than on their problem-saturated stories. This helps clients to separate from the dominant cultural narratives that they've internalized so as to open up space for the creation of alternative life stories that view them as separate from their problems. Problem-saturated stories in this case are deconstructed or taken apart before new stories can be created. This involves discussing how a problem has been disrupting, dominating, or discouraging the person and reminding them that the person is not the problem, but the problem is the problem. Knowing that a person is not a problem, that a person is not their problem, then we need to understand that when people become fused with their problems, they lose sight of their dreams, their values, their goals, and their skills, the things that really define who they are, separate from the problem. So narrative therapy then is concerned with our stories. And stories are events that occur over time in a person's life, some of which stand out as more important or more meaningful, such as those that stem from negative events. These profound stories end up shaping a person's identity. They basically influence our thoughts and in turn influence our decision-making and our behavior. This graphic here from positivepsychology.com provides a bit more information about some basic assumptions that narrative therapy follows in terms of what their understanding of reality is. Okay, so according to narrative therapy, reality is socially constructed. So what does that mean? That basically means that the way that we interact with others and the environments that we are in shape our perception of reality. If you live in poverty, for example, your view of reality may be one in which you are under-resourced or feel that you have to work extra hard to accomplish anything. Reality is also influenced and communicated through language. So the way that we speak about things is going to shape our reality. Narrative therapy also accepts that reality lends itself to multiple interpretations. So if you feel nervous when you get up on stage, you might interpret that as stage fright, whereas someone else might interpret it as anticipation and excitement. And many factors are going to influence the way that we interpret these events. Things like socioeconomic status, ethnicity, race, values, all of those things influence our interpretation. This means that there is no one objective reality or absolute truth because the way that an event is interpreted is going to differ based on the person. So some key concepts to keep in mind with narrative therapy. First, stories. I mentioned them already briefly. So for narrative therapy, therapists, stories are created through linking certain events together in a particular sequence across a time period. Then it involves finding a way of explaining or making sense of these experiences. And this meaning that is developed creates the plot for the story. And we're constantly giving meaning to our experiences as we live our daily lives. We also need to keep in mind that we usually have many stories occurring simultaneously. So we may have a story about our relationship, a story about our abilities, about our struggles, and so on. The way that we develop these stories is determined by how we've linked certain events together in a sequence and the meaning that we've attributed to them, which again is going to be a very individualized meaning. The DeWitt Center provides a helpful example that relates to driving. So let's say, for example, that you have a story about yourself as a good driver. This means that you could string together a number of events that have happened while you were driving. And you would put these together in a particular sequence and interpret them as a demonstration of you being a good driver. For example, when you use your turn signal or obey the speed limit, these things are going to be paid attention to much more heavily because they integrate into this story of you being a good driver. That means you're going to ignore or minimize evidence that shows that you perhaps aren't a good driver, like that car accident that you had. And as more and more events are added into the dominant plot of you being a good driver, the story becomes richer and thicker, and you more easily remember those events that fit that story and minimize those that do not fit. This dominant story of you being a good driver then influences your decision-making and behavior. Since you think you're a good driver, you may decide that driving at night in an unfamiliar neighborhood is safe for you, whereas someone who has the dominant narrative that they're not a good driver might avoid that kind of behavior. So this leads us into a dominant story. So while we have lots of stories in our minds happening at the same time, there's usually a story that's dominant in our lives. This is normal, but it becomes problematic when it gets in the way of our growth and change, because it starts to impact negatively our interactions with other people, our decision making, and our behavior. A related concept are thin descriptions. So judgments placed upon us by others, especially those that have been in a position of authority over us, like a parent or a caregiver, sometimes become internalized and integrated into our dominant story. For example, if a parent calls us lazy, we may begin to think of ourselves as lazy, making it a trait that we internalize. This then influences how we see ourselves and how we behave in the future. These thin descriptions tend to be focused on our weaknesses or areas that we feel that we lack in. And just like with the story example, evidence against the thin descriptions, for example, accomplishing something through hard work, which goes against the description of yourself as lazy, is often ignored or minimized because it doesn't match up with the dominant story. This makes things extremely hard to change because you continuously are minimizing evidence against and maximizing evidence for the thin description. This is where we'll stop this video. In the next one, we'll pick up with the therapeutic process through narrative therapy. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.